Welcome to another episode of the Network for Financial Crime Prevention podcasts. I'm your guest host, Marika Torsdotter, and this week we are joined by some very inspiring ladies in an International Women's Day special we call Women in Financial Crime Prevention. We will have a chance to understand what got these ladies into financial crime prevention to begin with, what aspect they enjoyed the most, if they have any advice for women looking to join, and so much more. But first, some quick housekeeping. If you are not a member of NFCP, you can sign up via our website, www.nfcp.info. Follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube channels. Our community exists for you, those who work in risk, compliance, and FinCrime areas in any industry. Keep in mind, we are only sharing our personal thoughts, and in no way what we say today should be taken as legal advice.
Hi.
Hi, Marika.
It's so nice to meet you again. It's been a while, a couple of
Yes.
years probably.
Probably.
Yeah, but it's so nice to have you here. But for those in the audience listening to this who haven't met you before, would you like to kick us off by introducing yourself and what you do?
Sounds great. So, hi, everybody. And Marika, I'm Hera Smith. Let's see, I work in financial crime and third-party risk. Now I work for a company called Moody's, but before that, I worked with several financial institutions, both in Europe and Denmark specifically, where I'm based right now, but also in the United States, specifically California. Yeah. So that's a quick background on my end.
Then we know what you do. And you focus on sanctions mostly, right?
I do a lot of sanctions and export control work, and it's been keeping me busy.
That I can imagine. So if we start by looking at the whole industry, is there anything that you would say this industry gets wrong that you would like to change?
Let's see. I think specifically, if you look at the area of sanctions, there's been so many changes going on, like one sanctions package after another, one announcement, enforcement action after another, that it's been really hard to keep up. And there's a lot of novel sanctions that comes out, which makes it hard for a lot of people who are trying to comply with it to operationalize these things, right? And they try to comply with it by implementing manual solutions, which may or may not directly address the risks that are presented there. And I think that one thing the industry gets wrong is that they tend to go inward when they're trying to solve these problems, when really they can reach out to companies, technology companies or data solution companies, and say, hey, we have this problem. Do you have a solution that could help us? Can we work together on this solution? It's not all about, a one-way street. Sometimes it can be a conversation with those specific technology companies who are actually really happy to help.
Yeah. And on the topic of technology, since you dived in a little bit into that and manual processes and, things compiling up changes, how do you see AI coming into the technology landscape and how do you see it changing things?
Oh, AI. It's been really interesting. So there's a study conducted by Moody's that was done in 2023 and another one was done in 2025. And the survey was taken against around 600 compliance and risk professionals. And if you look at it, the amount of usage in 2023 was significantly more, had increased significantly in 2025, and it's now like 50 something percent, if I remember correctly, with regard to those number of compliance and risk professionals who are using or trialing AI in their day-to-day work. So there has been a significant increase in terms of appetite and in terms of interest as well. And what else has significantly changed, or how has it significantly changed? I think the mindset around it has changed, but also the creativity by which people are thinking of how to use AI to solve problems has changed a lot as well. You can use it to summarize regulations, could be hundreds of pages long, and you don't have the time to sit down and read it word for word, page by page. And so maybe you can use these LLMs, large language models, to summarize it for you to see if there are parts that you need to delve into a little bit more, or if maybe it's not relevant to you at all. So that's one way of doing it. But another way is to look at the most repetitive manual tasks that you have in your operations, right? What are those pain points really slows things down. And how can you automate it? Maybe you can use AI or some sort of just more automated way of looking at this. This doesn't have to be AI. We can just be automating the whole process, and this would speed things up for you. And one of the areas I think that where it's most interesting is for the area of sanctions, for example. If you're screening something, there tends to be a lot of alerts, and you have a whole department teams dedicated to looking at these alerts, some of which this work is quite repetitive and manual. And so I think this is an area that is ripe for automation and leveraging AI. In fact, there was a Federal Reserve Board study that came out of the US that looked into this. They leveraged LLMs to look at the results of these, to do the screening. And they found out that this actually significantly reduced false positives by 90-something% and increased detection by 11%, which is amazing.
Wow, that's a really good numbers.
Yeah, but there is a catch. And
Okay.
that there's always a catch, right? Always. So they use LLMs, but this was really slow. And you want speed, right, when you're doing all of this. And so what they did when they looked at the study is they use fuzzy logic matching first, which is the more traditional way of looking at these matches, and then use LLM to look at the alerts that were issued, that were churned out. And that really significantly, what do you call that, hastened the process or made the whole process faster, and also gave the same result, same amazing result that we talked about. And so I think this is amazing. The fact that the U.S. regulator came out and published this is something, is quite revolutionary, which begs the question, if you're not using AI, these kinds of AI or technology in your screening process, is your screening process or operations really operating at the level where it's supposed to be? At a level where regulators expect it to be? If your detection rates could be higher and your false positives could be significantly lower, but you're not using this tool, then are you doing the right way? Are you doing it the right way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you point out a good thing there, or a good point, that you can start with something, and if it doesn't work and you don't get the right speed or whatever, you can try it again in a different format. You don't have to reject it altogether. It's to finding that balance between, AI language models, different old types of way of working and the new combined. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing, right? That's the beauty of it. I think being compliance, you're always, a little risk averse. And so you don't want to go out and try things just in case it doesn't work and then you're in trouble or something like that. But that's the nice thing about technology, is you can actually just play with it and see what comes out of it, right? Don't be afraid to use technology.
No, we definitely shouldn't be afraid to use technology. You're right about that. You know a lot about this field, but you didn't start out in FCP, right? You kind of stumbled into it. Did you start in litigation law? Do I remember correctly?
Yes. I was working for a law firm back in Los Angeles, and I kind of stumbled into financial crime as a result of that. Let's see. So what's the story? I met somebody who was working in a bank. And I said, hey, actually, I just passed the bar recently. Do you guys happen to be looking for somebody who has a legal background and can help you in your business? And he said, yeah, actually, because I've met him several times before. And he said, send me your resume and I'll send it over to HR. And he sent it over to HR, did an interview, and the head of the AML officer, so to speak. This is because this was in the US. He asked me, like, okay, well, I think you're a good fit. We're actually looking for somebody with a legal background who can help us out. And then he gave me kind of a choice between the different departments within AML, which is the kind of financial crime, as we call it here in Europe. And so, but I naturally gravitated towards sanctions because of the kind of legalese involved there, interpreting the law. And this was around the time that Russia had invaded Crimea, and there were a lot of sanctions coming out that required somebody to look at the alerts, to look at the regulations and interpret it and apply it and operationalize it. And so I naturally gravitated towards that. And, I've loved it ever since. It's been my career for more than a decade, and I am so glad I chose to go in that specific direction.
It's a very inspiring story. With that background that you kind of stumble into it, would you say that you have any skills from outside the industry that proven, unexpected valuable that you didn't think would work out that well?
Let's see. Well, this is a good one. So in my current job, I do a lot of thought leadership. I speak at a lot of conference events and whatnot. That's part of my job. And I think one skill that I didn't think was going to be so helpful was teaching kids. So back in the day, I used to tutor kids. In addition to, while I was in high school, college, and law school, I would tutor kids on the side. And I didn't realize that skill of public speaking or really teaching kids and making the material really engaging so they listen to you and to simplify it so they understand it is a skill that would come handy like decades or like now. And going into compliance, you wouldn't think that would be as helpful, but in my current work, it really is. And it's so helpful to kind of to have grown that level of comfortability with speaking to a number of people, whether they're toddlers or full grown adults who are older than I am, or our age. It doesn't matter because it's about making the material understandable and digestible, but also interesting.
That's so cool. A tutor, like you've been a tutor for kids. So
Yes.
I'm not going to ask if people need to tutor you at work, but perhaps have you had like a mentor? Let's use that word instead. Someone that helped you for your career.
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of mentors throughout my career. One of that person I told you who helped me get into this field, I think was a really good mentor. Yeah, I think at one point I felt a certain sense of indebtedness and loyalty to him. And, when I was thinking of moving to another job in another company, I felt really bad. And I had a discussion with him about this. And he said, Hera, nobody's going to get mad if you move to another company. It's okay. And I felt like, okay, well, it was really nice of him to say that and also reassured me. And it kind of set the tone as well for my future career paths in that, really, if that somebody cares for you enough to be your mentor and to support your career, it doesn't really matter if you stay with them in that specific job, in that specific role. It's about pushing you to grow and being happy for you when you do grow.
That is so true. And you've grown a lot in your career in different, role and aspects. But I love how you talk about your work, that it's not just like about the sanction and the financial crime. It's also about supporting developing countries. It's about the prevention of the abuse that comes as a side of this type of crime. So if we talk a little bit more about like the human aspect of things, is there anything that you think is very interesting about human behavior, which you've learned through this job?
Let's see. Well, for me, humans are really interesting. They can be quite creative with how, there's creative compliance, but there's also creative evasion. So you can really see how people try to get around or try to follow the law in a way that makes the most sense. But I think at the end of the day, while that is true, it's also true that people are quite predictable in some ways. I was surprised at how reactions can be quite similar sometimes, or there's a range of reactions when you're presented with a certain situation. So I thought that was really interesting how people are predictable, but they're also unpredictable in some sense. Like, say, for example, with sanctions evasion, how they're evading sanctions is pretty much the same way as they've been doing it. It's just amplified a lot more. They're doing it at a larger scale. So that is true. So I'm trying to think of an actual example. Say, for example, changing flags of ships, or changing the registry, the country where they're registered at, if that's a clearer way of doing it. That's an easy way of getting around the rule. If the rule is against a specific ship, flag in a certain country with a certain name, then maybe you just change the name, and maybe you just register in another country and I've seen some cases where they change the IMO number, which is like a license plate, but for ships, and they just paint over the number. So instead of an 8, it becomes a 0. Things like this are old school ways of doing things, but they are still they use the same things, the same ways of evading sanctions. So it's not surprising that they continue on doing that. But at the same time, there are actually other creative ways of evading sanctions, which I won't go to in too much detail here for obvious reasons. But some of them can be quite creative.
I've learned a new phrase, creative compliance. Yeah.
You don't want that, but yes.
We don't want that, but I've learned the phrase. These were good examples, but we don't have to go into more detailed, advanced examples. So I know this would have been a kind of a good way to wrap up this conversation about these things, but I would like to ask you one more question, because we call this mini series Women in Financial Crime Prevention. Since you've been in the field for a long time, have you seen the gender dynamics change in any way in financial crime prevention in recent years or during your career?
I would say that when I was in a more junior role in compliance, the division of by gender, I don't know if that's the right way of phrasing it, but the number of women versus the number of women were either equal or there were more women. But the higher up the chain one goes, it seems like the gender dynamic actually shifts. In some cases, there's more men who are the heads than there are women, even though there's actually more women doing the actual work. So it's a very interesting dynamic. In some cases, I walk into a room and I'm the only woman there. And it's really interesting. I think that holds true not just for compliance, but in a lot of different specializations as well, where in the bottom of the rung, it's either equal or, or there's even more women in some industries. But the higher up you go, for some reason, that dynamic changes as well. There's been several studies that look into this as well. Yeah. And I think there are, of course, exceptions here and there, but generally I speak to, I meet a lot of different compliance and risk professionals, and that is what I see a lot of.
I've seen it as well. So that's also one of the reasons that we want to do this series, to highlight some women in the field and hopefully get more women inspired to get in and move up, because there are a lot of inspiring ladies in this field, and you are absolutely one of them. I mean, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I learned some new phrases and some new other things as well. And I thank you so much for that.
You're welcome, Marika. It was really, really great talking with you.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you're interested in other episodes in this series, you can find them on LinkedIn, on our Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube channels. If you want to learn more about NFCP, you can find us at nfcp.info. We also got virtual and in-person events coming up, thought leaderships from practitioners across the globe, and a growing network of people who understand that financial crime prevention is a shared responsibility, and that it's better when we do it together. Until next time.